Hello, welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports and another edition of What is in Our Stand today. Today we're going to talk about a bike that came in for brake rub and brake noise and a few other things. And we're also going to talk about the installation of those pads. But before we get on to the topic of today, please like and subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything, but it means the world to me. Okay, so let's get started. So this bike came in from one of my customers who spends a lot of time on steep type grades, and he's like, "Oh, I'm getting some brake rub. I'm getting a lot of loud noise and stuff." And I'm like, "Okay, well, bring it in. Let's take a look." So we ended up on the rear replacing the pads and the rotor because they were worn really badly. And then on the front one, we also had to replace the pads. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is something I spoke to with my Shimano tech rep, and something I hadn't heard before, and so I want to share it with you. So what happened was, as I was replacing the brake pads on the front, in the past I've explained this, but I'll go through it again. When you're riding hydraulic disc brakes, not so much on cable, but hydraulic disc brakes, they self-adjust. So here's what's happening. You have pistons that are pushing on brake pads, and those brake pads push onto a rotor. So as those pistons keep pushing, and you start to get the pads to wear and or the rotor is wearing, so both things are happening, but sometimes you can replace 2 to 3 sets of pads before you have to replace the rotor. And that's not that's not something you can quote me. It's just been my experience. So now you have these pistons pushing out. Pads are wearing onto the rotor's wearing. When you replace one or both of those components in the system, either the rotor or the pads, you have to push the pistons back in. When you push the pistons back in, a new brake pad with all that excess material will then allow for you to put the wheel back in. So there's that, but then also sometimes the wheel may be out of the bike and you may not have that little travel wedge that goes inside the brake pads, and you may inadvertently hit your brake lever and the pads will start to extend. And then you go to put the wheel back in and you're like, the wheel doesn't fit. The rotor does not have enough clearance to get through the pads that have been pushed out. So as a typical process, we take a tool like this to wedge in between the pads, and then that pushes the pistons back in. We can also, when the pads are not installed, use this to push the pistons back in. Or in this case, I like plastic tire levers, and the Pedro's lever, it's almost just the right thickness that you need when the pads are not installed. This one, when the pads are installed. Okay, but this time, like every other time, I push the pistons back in, and all of a sudden, I hear and see some hydraulic fluid coming from the left shifter, the front brake system. So I'm like, what's going on? So I do replace the pads, put the wheel back in, and I'm squeezing the brake lever and it's really soft. And I'm thinking, okay, well, since there was some fluid leaking out, let me bleed the brakes, top off the fluid inside the hydraulic system, and all should be good. Well, it wasn't. I still had a soft lever, and the lever kept going all the way to the bar, and I kept pulling on the lever. Nothing would happen. But then I noticed more fluid coming out. I'm like, oh, what's going on? Well, it turns out that the fluid, of course, has nowhere to go if you're pushing those pistons back in. And if you force it, which I didn't, I pushed it less, or not as hard as I've done other pistons. I mean, not even close. I've had some where the pistons are just stuck and I'm having to push really hard. By the way, I cleaned them and lubed them with mineral oil before I went to push them back in. So there wasn't any dirt trapped in there, and and it was not a dry install, if you will. I was pushing them back in after they had been lubed. Well, I talked to my Shimano rep because I'm going to show you something here in a minute. I sent him a video of this fluid leaking, and I thought, we've got a problem. And he said, yeah, we're going to warranty that shifter. It's Ultegra. It's got a 2-year warranty, but I think we're still under 2 years, but they would have done it anyway. That's how good Shimano is. So let me show you what I saw when I was doing the repair. So, Mr. Cameraman, if you would please come really close as you can, and try to focus in this area right here. So if you can zoom in and you have good access. So you can see this is still wet because I've been trying to find a way to shoot a video of this, but because these aero bars are in the way. But if we just squeeze this, you should start to see in just a second or two it's not doing it now, of course, but see, this is all still wet and it'll still keep leaking out. But it was kind of bubbling up right there, and that was obviously not good. Well, that's what happens when you go live. It's not doing what it was doing before. But this lever, when you would pull on it, it would leak from right there, and it was just creating this bubble. So if you put these pads back in, it just doesn't work as advertised. So the lever keeps going all the way down. All right, so anyway, we'll move on from that. But it was leaking, and that's why it's still wet. But then that got me thinking, well, how are we supposed to do this if I push, and I've been pushing pistons in for years. And the Shimano tech rep said, oh, you're supposed to put the funnel on there when you are even just to replace pads. And I hadn't heard that before, and I've looked at several videos from Shimano, and they don't mention it. So I don't know. I trust my Shimano tech rep because, well, this is what they do, and they are constantly training on new systems and all that. So the brake shifter lever is going to be replaced via warranty, and that brought up another point that I wanted to share with you. And this will be a longer video, a more specific video at another time, but because I'm working on this bike, I want to share with you my thoughts on internal cable routing and what a nightmare it is for the consumer to have a nice, clean and tidy, no cables, no wires showing front end. It's a nightmare for the mechanics, and oh, by the way, it's a nightmare also when the repair bill is given to the consumer, because let's say we're just doing a headset replacement, which is a 5 to 20 minute 5 to 15 minute job at the most. You can't replace the headset bearings because of all the cabling that's going on, that's integrated and hiding through the bar and hiding through the stem. So I want to show you this picture, which Cycling Weekly is using. So I want to make sure I give them credit for it. But this is a perfect storm situation where this is the handlebar, this is the stem. So in this case, this is a integrated bar stem. What I'm going to show you is not integrated bar stem, but same principle. You have the hydraulic hoses running down through the headset, okay? And so this right here, that's the headset bearings. So you can see the little bearings graphic there. And so you have the headset bearings enclosing your hydraulic lines. And let me show you what that looks like in real life as well. So these two bearings, one being the top bearing, one being the bottom bearing, this is how the hydraulic lines are running through on the frame. So let's walk back over to the frame and let me show you what this is so it makes more sense to you. So the hydraulic line is coming from here, in through the bar, coming out of the bar, underneath here actually, and then going into the stem, coming through the stem, down through the headset. So this would look, give me a second. This would look like this right now. A top bearing, a bottom bearing, and these hydraulic lines running through it. Okay? Absolutely idiotic. Absolutely stupid. And I just don't understand why frame designs are moving in this direction, why the consumer is demanding hidden cables, hidden housing, and all that stuff. Absolutely stupid. So now that hose for the front brake is running through those headset bearings and coming out of the fork leg right here. And then the other one is running down through here and out through the rear chainstay. I should say the left chainstay. Okay, so luckily on this bike, it's the front. It's a little less tear down. I'm going to see if it's even possible to make all this work without having to touch the rear at all. We'll see. One of the things that's a huge pain when it comes to doing hydraulic lines is that, let me open this up. This is called an insert, and this is called an olive. And so every time you do a hydraulic line installation, you insert one of these in here. These are just regular brake lines. They're not hydraulic. So you take this, push that in there, and then you have this olive. And this olive is then, when you install the line, it crushes it and creates a seal. And one-time use only. So every time that you disconnect your line or anything like that, you risk it leaking if you do not go through this process again. And this insert, as you can see, it's about that long. So you have to, if this is installed, you have to cut the line right there to reuse this line. Okay, so that insert that you have in there, you then have to cut the line here and then put a new insert, put a new olive, crush it as you install the line. So anytime you're doing any type of work on your hydraulic lines and they're going through the fork and going through the headset, going through the head tube, that just means a lot more labor time that the mechanic has to charge you to do something as simple as replacing $30 worth of bearings on a 5 to 10, 15-minute job. Anyway, we're going to get more into this hopefully because the shifter is now on back order. This is December the 28th of 2021, so we still have inventory shortages everywhere for everything, but Shimano stood behind their product. They're sending me a lever, I think lever line and caliper, so the whole system is going to get replaced, which is awesome. But the labor costs of going all the way through the bar, or through the stem, through the bar, out the other end, I don't know which way I'm going to go, but we'll figure that out later. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. A little bit of a rant, but some of you who've been coming onto my channel know that internal cable routing is stupid. It's stupid. It doesn't do anything. Aerodynamics, that's just ridiculous. Okay, clean and tidy, okay, that's a preference, aesthetics. But aerodynamics, your head, your melon on the top of your body is way thicker than this little line. So what aerodynamic benefits are you getting from hiding a hydraulic hose or two? It's just stupid. Thank you for letting me rant, and thank you for coming on to the channel. I appreciate each and every one of you who have liked and have subscribed. But if you haven't, please do so. And in the meantime, we'll see you up the road.